Hey, Julia.
Hey Mako, how are you?
Oh, it was so good to see you in Pasadena. We
It's
had we
good
had
to
an
see you.
Embers event, and and you were kind enough to come out. Thanks so much.
Of course. It's so good to hear how beauty and justice is being shared with
Yeah.
the world. I mean, you and Hajan are doing this remarkable thing of going to 37 cities.
Yes.
God bless.
Somebody counted. I I didn't even know it was 37. Yeah,
That's a
and
lot of work.
I guess so. It's kind of on the go, and like even this trip, initial impetus was go to LA because my son Ty invited me to the U.S. soccer game, the World Cup game, the first one in SoFi Stadium. And by the way, for those of you listening to this, and it's on my Substack site, which is there to help partly to raise money for this kind of effort. We are both part of a nonprofit, and it always we have to make sure that it gets to the essays and so forth that we do, the newsletters and so forth are free to people, so it really helps us. But anyway, so I'm there. Well, I told Hejan, hey, is it okay if we go out to LA to the first World Cup game for United States? And she was like, great, yeah, let's do a numbers event. And one event turned into two turned into this whole West Coast journey to Seattle, very briefly, but Seattle and then Vancouver, and then came back through Portland. So yeah, so these things just happen, and I'm just there carrying her bag and then enjoying this beautiful ride from, as it turned out, Seattle to Portland is quite beautiful. So I really enjoyed it, but it works like that, doesn't it? Relationships create
Yeah.
opportunities.
Yes. Yes. And as you're doing all of this traveling and reflecting and sharing about beauty and justice,
Mhm.
what conversational trends are you noticing?
That's a really great question. And of course, it's different for each group. But, the fact that we're talking about beauty and justice in general and the kind of response we have been getting is very broad, first of all. And because this book actually captures both sides of our brain, as it were, the left side, analytical. Hedgen's a very analytical, organized writer, and I'm much more intuitive. So I come from the studio here, and then my work gives birth to many of my books. So it works very differently. And when we merge the two together, it just happens to work, I think, very well because you can enter through either side. And the real hard work was trying to integrate the two, right? Two voices. And because our marriage is all about that, to somehow find a voice together, right? As well as individually. And so, as we have been lecturing on beauty and justice for several years now, and it made sense to write this book, and then the response we have been getting for sure is from a very diverse, wide audience that seemed to resonate with the message, actually from both sides, and so it's been an interesting journey. Um, Even though I have written many books on beauty and art, um, I never had an event at Barnes Museum in Philadelphia. Uh, this group, Generous Life, generously hosted us, and it was this fantastic event. The one of the most important institutions in America, certainly in Philadelphia, museum. very high level place, and yet we're talking about slums and how beauty leads to our understanding of the poor, the marginalized, and that's really beautiful way that works. And the audience was mainly not people that I would guess would come to a museum. They tend to be business people, lawyers, and very busy people. There were a few artists, but it was an event to talk about stewardship or about wealth, and so it was a completely different audience from what I'm used to. So those things are beginning to happen, which is exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting how you can find yourself in all these different conversations.
Right.
And as you were talking, I must admit, I was also distracted by the conversation happening in the studio because I see new work on the floor behind you.
Oh yes, it's actually a commission that came out of these relationships that we have been building. Um, and not that they wouldn't have come, let's say, from a gallery in New York or elsewhere, but I'm really finding that first of all, our world is changing, right? It's drastically changing. It's so different from it was 5 years ago. Certainly pre-pandemic, Instagram wasn't what it is. The art fair was the dominant force, and I avoided that scene because it didn't seem to help people slow down. It was a big party scene, and of course, there's merit to that, and I'm not against that. But for my own work, I didn't feel like it fit into that paradigm, and it probably never does to any context. But nevertheless, and then all of a sudden we're finding a new environment where you posting regularly of your creative process. Recent processing of like momigami and what you're doing is just fascinating to watch. And sharing that as a spiritual discipline, although your audience is very broad, it's basically a culture care, the foundation that you're building. And I'm realizing like, oh, relationships are important. We were just having a conversation with Hejin about um, how it's not about the transaction of doing a commission or, making a sale. It's really about the relationship. So how do you honor that first
Yes.
before you talk about anything else, numbers or whatever? But those things are just an end product and means of being in a environment of support. And what patronage should be about is first of all, artists being able to find support long term, um, but also artists providing a meaningful reality, right? To share the meaning of art, and what we individually can bring into that conversation to people, and and becoming a blessing to that person's family or community. And we kind of experienced it at Pasadena event because the host has few of my pieces that I did in Pasadena over 5 years ago. I was able to revisit that and talk about it. You and I stood in front of several of those, and we were sharing how much time has revealed things in those works. So it just seems to be more integrated that way, and I'm deeply grateful for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's what you're talking about in this idea of patronage. It is a
Hmm.
culture care value, right?
Absolutely.
And it is about community.
Hmm.
because the artist has always been, in a way, a mirror,
Hmm.
but the future.
Hmm.
Like,
Hmm.
we're going to reflect back what we see, but we're
Hmm.
going to tell you another narrative.
Yeah. And we're in a sense creating the future, right, at that moment. And what a privilege it is to, not just take what has been given to us as foundations of the past, which artists are doing, and be present in the moment, which artists are also doing, but endeavor to create the future in some way with people who are supporting the system. And this is what the gallery system is unable to do for many years. It has bifurcated itself into, five galleries in New York that dominated the market, right? And then the mid-tier galleries struggle to exist. There were entry-level galleries that were doing very important work in East Village and Brooklyn and, Philadelphia and Los Angeles and other places, but they were isolated and they couldn't really find a way to to this dominant whatever art world is, that exclusivity of the top tier. And then art fairs came in, and these mid-tier galleries struggled because in order to do an art fair, you have to invest in that, and your staff time and so forth is completely taken up in this, moving target. And there's no thought of nurturing young talents. So artists have no space to fail, basically. As you know, and I know well, you cannot grow without having the freedom to fail, try new things, and then, it takes a long time, for roots to take to the soil of culture. So we haven't been able to create this organic and um, long-term vision for younger artists to grow. Now, then on the other side is the art schools, you know, which is kind of built as almost this transactional machine to feed into this transactional system, which doesn't nurture anybody, right? Spits people out. If you find success in that system, it's bad news because you're asked to perform the same thing over and over, basically, when you really need time to, you know, experiment, grow as an artist. And so we have been talking about this since the 90s, and there was no practical way for young artists to come into the art market and find long-term support, right? So to me, patronage has to do that. The stewardship of talents has to take into the account that art requires a long time, maybe generations, to develop into something substantial that can change the course of civilization. And therefore, creating the future can mean not just responding to crisis after crisis, and which is important, this prophetic cry to reveal what is happening, but also think of long term, 500 years from now. What would we see in places where art is held? How do we feed our imagination to see that future? And so all of that is, right now in flux. And what we experienced in Pasadena was this moment where kind of very uniquely these things came together almost by accident because we were talking about Beauty and Justice book, Hedgen's work with Embers and our support for these children growing up in the slums. But at the same time, it was as if we are finding a new way to do art, right? That we get to talk about beauty and justice together. That that somehow enlivens our imagination to create something that is literally integrated into what we hope for these very children, right? That we're serving. What kind of future would they have? Well, it depends on how we imagine that
Mhm.
future to be.
Yeah. And so within that, I I also just want to go back like 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Um, what would be your pep talk for artists that want to do this generative work,
Yeah.
that want to be seen as artists? What
Yeah.
do you say to them?
Yeah, you're setting me up perfectly for this book and culture care book, second edition coming out with forward by David Brooks. It's you can pre-order it now, and um,
Because it
it's a
comes out next month,
next
right?
month. Yeah, and I'm so excited about this because how many times do you ever get to rework your book? And this is a huge blessing to be able for me to see that little seeds of idea, right, became it was first of all written for my staff at International Arts Movement, and so it was kind of a if not a manifesto, it was kind of a workbook, for us to have words to talk about culture care rather than culture wars. What are we doing? What are we focused on? And and so for artists, I always said to remind artists of their first love. Why do you do what you do? Well, it seems to me that this is a gratuitous gift to the world. You don't want to become a dancer just to be famous. Like you become a dancer because you love to dance. You love to express, something about yourself using your body. And yet, perhaps along the way, we have forgotten that. And by returning to our first love, what happens is we begin to walk into this realm of generosity, right? And so I said, surprisingly, to people seeking patronage, you're the most generous, you have the potential to be the most generous person in the room because you have already proven it by being an artist. Nobody told you to, be an artist. You had this first love and you thought this was important. It was an essence of who you are, and you really needed to cultivate it and it's do the hard work when nobody's wanting you to do this, and there's no transactional, reality that says, it's somehow beneficial economically to do this. And because you were able to see the essence of who you are, what the world needs, perhaps, we are giving something time and effort in generosity, right? And that triggers something. So I found artists to be the most generous people in the world if there is proper environment for that. Right? If
Yes.
we're living day to day, survival mode, that's really hard to do. In fact, it's hard to be an artist doing that. Many artists are, walking into that, walking through that. But in inside of us, there's this ember of generosity, and what our culture should do is to care and make sure that the ember becomes a fire, to blow into it, to give it life. But it does the opposite, right? It takes away life rather than giving it life. And so artists are so in front lines of this battle that we have forgotten that we can be the most generous people in the world. Now, having said that, of course, the reaction will be that, perhaps everything from, but I need support, right? I need support right now for what I do. Yes. And that we want collectively, um, but help that. But the first step is it's the not to believe that you live in that scarcity because your art never was from that world, right? That's a different world, and we have to deal with that. But your art is from a world of abundance, world of beauty, world of extravagance, right? And it's flowing out of that into your body, and you want to do something about it. So first of all, you know, reimagine what that is. Poets are good at that mindset, I find. And so sometimes when, I struggle with trapped in the scarcity mindset, poetry helps to unlock something about the universe that I had forgotten about, right? So Emily Dickinson of the world knows, like, even though there was no audience for this thing that she was writing, this fascicle that she was creating, um, that these words mean something to the world, and therefore it's enduring, right? It wasn't like finding a publisher and letting her writing endure. It was like she knew that her words will be enduring because it has meaning, truth to it. That's a different mindset, right? And I think despite the struggles that she faced in life, certainly in her faith, there is something about that first love being rekindled every time she wrote a line. And so we need to be the first to initiate that cycle of generosity. And artists are good at this because we're used to being told not to do it. We're used to having not just budget that is, zero, but minus. So, and so we are the perfect people to start this cycle of generosity, and do it without getting anybody watching it. We're used to that. Behind the scenes, behind the, theater, every theater production is somebody setting the lights and making the costumes, and these things we have gained access to as somatic knowledge of
Mhm.
who we are. And
Mhm.
that should define our community. We should say 100% that, we want people to be seen, but also we need to acknowledge that for every success, there's thousands of people behind the scenes, right? That artists need to acknowledge.
Mhm.
That's hard to do if you're filled with, self-expression and ego. You think it's all your work, but that's not in reality what's happening, right? So my charge to artists would be to begin thinking of yourself as a patron,
Mhm.
and invest in somebody else, even though you have nothing, because when you do that, you realize that cycle of this dependency to scarcity begins to erode. This new world somehow opens up where there's somehow you're able to access once again what you have lost perhaps in the survival mode, and and the then what happens, or what I have noticed when people do that, is that that story, if it is a story that is publicly shared, many stories are not, but sometimes you hear stories of extraordinary kindness and generosity. And if it's coming from the maker to the world, then artist also has a capacity to amplify that generosity, right? So we have this invisible capital of relationships and expression that we are good at. And the more you do it, so it, I remember I write about this in Culture Care book, but one time we were doing auction of, we were selling small works to raise money for I Am Culture Care. And you're humbly asking artists to submit a piece, donate a piece. And what always happened is that artists will not only submit a piece, they will frame it. They will frame it and bring it from Michigan. They'll get on the airplane to serve at this event because they know our staff will be, taxed. The work that goes into these exhibits is enormous. They know that, right? So they come and volunteer, and we didn't ask them to do this. They just show up, right, with a frame piece ready to be hung, and they said, "How can we serve you? So how can we serve this organization?" And we're like, "We're supposed to serve you. This is for you." Like, and then next day, I get a check in the mail from an artist who is like, I know she couldn't afford the amount that was in the check. There was no way, I've been in her studio. I know her life, and yet there it is, right? And that check felt like so huge to us, collectively. Like this was like $5 million, because the amount of love and care that went into writing that check, sending it with a nice note saying how much, this movement has helped shape her as an artist. That's like, yeah, stuff that you can't, put into words. So I've always this is why I say artists can be the most generous people in the world. And by us talking about it right now, right, there'll be people listening to this, hopefully, and saying, "Oh, I know people like that. I know a poet, who's working um, in a quiet corner." Um, and we begin to find these connections, this network of thoughts, and we begin to live into that. And by the way, today in this social media algorithm world where every machine is listening, um, it is quite possible that if we start a conversation like this of generosity among artists and we talk about it like we are right now, that that algorithm will take that and multiply it, just as they would, right? They would send a note to Amazon, like we were talking about this cosmetic, all of a sudden it pops up, right? Why not intentionally say out loud? Like
Yes.
artists are the most generous people in the world, and we can lead in generosity and break the cycle of, trauma and scarcity in the world, and we will create a future that is abundant and hopeful and filled with love, even for the child growing up in the slum, in the opposite side of the world. Why don't we just say that, right, out loud, which this beauty and justice, tool has given us an opportunity to. But then I realized, like, this is not just us dreaming, like speculating. We have the ability to create with our words the future outcomes. And algorithm can help that. Like it can multiply it and send it into spaces that we don't even know that exists. And all of a sudden you're connected, that way. And we're talking about how generosity of an artist or whatever, and it goes way outside the church, by the way. Many times when I have culture care conversations that go into social media, so many people react that are not even close to the realm of the church, right? And we know that as artists, but so this is magic when it gets multiplied, and those are the things that I would say to an artist.
Thank you for the pep talk. And
Yes.
I want to add a couple things to it
Yeah. Yeah.
because yes, artists are the most generous and don't take advantage of the artists. Be good
Right. Yeah.
patrons.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
artists know to be good patrons, but it require for it to be a living ecosystem, not a draining ecosystem. It needs to have people that are saying, "Hey, you're a poet. I've got a really great space. Would you like to do a reading?" And then figuring out if there's a way for any other capitalist connection point for the art for the poet to maybe make some money on the evening,
Hmm.
in some way. That's part of being a good patron, not just expecting the artists to just give and give and give.
Yeah.
We want to give and give and give,
Right.
and we will. But how then are the patrons also showing up and supporting and building this generative future together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, exactly.
Because
Exactly.
you get, I mean, I'm sure every day you get a request. Will you give this? Will you give this? Will you give? And it's like, yes, I want to give to all of you. These are all very valid, important, generative causes. And patronage is required as well.
Yes. Thank you. Absolutely. And because we live in this scarcity mindset transactional world,
Yeah.
the world will unintentionally, without even knowing, draw these creatures that inhabit in the gift economy side and
Mm-hmm.
draw them out, right? And as if these things are going to help the artist. And we don't often realize that we're playing the same game, of power and institutional preservation, uh, that decimates creativity and imagination. Going back to the art world, it's not too often that I find a gallery that takes a risk on young artists for long term. I'm talking about at least 10 years, if not 20, and commit to that. Um, these are what true patrons used to do, right? I mean, I talk about even the finances of this, right? The galleries expect 50% of the sales. Guess what? That came when Peggy Guggenheim was funding, artists, abstract expressionists, paying for their studio and their assistant, right? And the materials. And then paying for the shipment, creating catalogs, and all of these things were done with their 50%. And today, artists have to do all of that with their 50%. That's not sustainable. It's what you're talking about. You're taking advantage of someone whose life calling is to give away the gifts, and you have to understand that there's so much that go into that work of art. It's not just the time spent on painting it. It's many, many years of fading at it, lifetime, right? Of building up to that work. And that work only exists for that moment. And so it's invaluable, right? So you can't put a price on it and think that that's going to solve the problem. So a lot of times we are taken advantage of because of tendency to be very generous.
And I just want to co-sign, we control the algorithm. People
Yes.
are like, oh, I have to do this one thing to fit in the algorithm of social media. And it's like, no, you can do your own thing and the algorithm will adjust.
Isn't that amazing? I love to talk about this next time because you have been very successful in growing your audience, and how they do it. And what you just said makes sense to me because actually, if you have to push through certain thresholds, but when you do it wisely and consistently, you kind of break through, and you all of a sudden the algorithm is feeding your vision, you know. And that's true of AI in general.
Lots of ecosystems of
Let's
care
so
to consider.
ecosystem. Yes, yeah, we need to think through that. Yeah.
So good.
Okay,
Thank you,
Julie.
Mako.
Thank you, and blessings on your journey to create.
Same to you.